It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege of interviewing the Gordon's head rowing coach, Coach Maddie Hopkins. How are you doing today?
Great.
Can you talk about how you knew that you wanted to get started in coaching and college rowing?
Yeah, so I actually am a second generation coach. So both of my parents coached high school level, but they also started their college rowing team at Union College. And so I grew up around the sport and I was very involved from like a really young age. I grew up like on a safety boat. And so it was always something that was really exciting for me. And I loved being around it. It gave me a lot of energy, brought a lot of life. And when I got the opportunity to like do it full time, it was like pretty much the best thing ever. So
What was that experience like for you going to Gordon and getting to compete in rowing as an athlete?
It was definitely not something I took for granted. So when I was a student, Gordon did not have a rowing team. And it was not originally my plan. I was going to row Division I and do that whole thing. And then I realized that most Division I programs will not let you study theater and row Division I because theater requires you to be in the theater late at night, and rowing requires you to be on the water early in the morning, and theater requires you to be at shows on the weekend, and rowing requires you to be at races on the weekend. And so it felt stupid to go to school for a sport and not what I wanted to study. And I didn't want to change my area of study. So I had to kind of last minute as a senior in high school, switch things around, and wound up going to a school for theater, Gordon, and then brought my boat out and just raced in a single by myself for 3 years of undergrad. So it was like a very, very big growing up experience for me to have to kind of do that on my own without support from a coach or teammates or things like that.
What was that process like for you, obviously growing up as a rower and being from a family of rowers?
We joke about it all the time because I'm the oldest of 9. All of us have rowed. All the older kids like are very, very into the sport, and all the like younger ones are kind of exploring other sports and doing other things. And we think it's very funny that we joke it skipped a generation. But at the same time, I think that with a sport like rowing, it's so expensive and the barrier to entry is so high because you need the equipment and you need to know how to use the equipment and you need to have the skills. And so if all that's taken care of, it becomes really easy to just jump into the sport wherever you are. And I don't think that would have happened if I didn't have the background and the family that was like, oh yeah, we have a boat in the backyard you can use. And like, we have oars and we have all these supplies you need. And you grew up in a boat, so you know how to do it and do it well. So I think a lot of the time people are often like, whoa, it's so cool that you started a program. But like at the same time, it was made much, much easier for me than it would be for somebody else because of my family.
Of course, how was that experience like coming to Gordon and getting to start up the rowing program at Gordon?
Absolutely wild. I don't recommend it actually. Like I'm so grateful that I did it, but it was very draining, very exhausting, and a lot of just I think the who don't do the sport to think like, no, I promise it's a really good idea to sit on our butts and go backwards. And lots of people will do it and they'll love it and it'll be great. And if you haven't experienced that sport firsthand, it's very hard to believe someone who's telling you that. And so that was probably the biggest challenge I faced, was just like convincing other people that it was a good idea to have a rowing team because it was going to be fun and people were going to like it.
What was that feeling like when you got announced to become the first ever head coach for the rowing program?
So exciting. Actually, I don't know that to be perfectly honest, I don't know that I was announced. I think it just happened because everyone was a little like, whoa, we're starting a rowing team. And it happened very fast. Like I was biking, getting ready for my last national championship as a rower. I was like in the gym biking, and the athletic director wandered in. He was like, do you have 15 minutes to talk in my office? And I was like, sure. And I had just gotten rejected from my last grad school. And I was like, man, I really it was so weird that I got rejected. Like I met all the requirements. It didn't make any sense. And then he was like, so I want to hire you full time to run the rowing team. And I was like, oh, that's why I got rejected. Cause this was like supposed to work out this way.
Of
So
course, what was that transition like from planning to go to grad school, but then getting into becoming a head coach for rowing?
yeah, it was, I think, exactly what was supposed to happen. And I'm a believer. I believe in God, and I 100% believe that was like God's plan. That and so when everything just feels right, even if it's difficult or hard, if it's like this is where I'm supposed to be, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, it's all worth it, and it's so much easier than it could have been if it felt like maybe I'm not supposed to be here. So I was really grateful for just that total peace that it was the right decision, it was the right thing to do, and then just having the opportunity was so exciting and so much fun.
Being a young coach and being a first time head coach, how has that been like, obviously building the program from the ground up?
Yeah. Um, it's been very challenging for sure, but it's been really fun to see how I've grown alongside all the kids that I'm working with. My first year, I had athletes who were older than me. I graduated really young from college, and there were literally guys on the team who were older than I was. And I was responsible for running their program. And it was like, oh my goodness. And now I think it's so important that young women are engaged in coaching, especially in the sport of rowing. We've seen this like mass exodus of female coaches from the sport. And I think that's a crime, a travesty, that, the sport has not, rowing programs across the country are not designed to work for the long term for someone working in them. And I was given the opportunity to start a program from the ground up, which means I could decide that it was going to work long term for whoever was in this coaching position down the road. And that's been a huge part of the decisions that I've made and the structure we've come up with is like, make this sustainable, make this something that will last, and not something that's going to rely on someone working, 95-hour weeks every single week.
What has that transition been like for you, getting to coach those athletes that are maybe older than you or about the same age as you?
Mm-hmm. I always had the leg up in that I knew more about the sport than they did, and I was better at it than they were, which is a huge, huge win. I don't know how I would have done it if it wasn't very evident that I knew what I was talking about and that I understood the way that like boats and biomechanics and athletes like worked better than they did. Because I think if they knew better than me, I would not be able to have had that like that. There would be no respect for me.
Can you talk about, of course, the culture that you've started to build for the rowing program?
Mm-hmm. So a big thing that we have kind of rallied behind is this idea in scripture. It says that if you are faithful with little, you'll be trusted with much. And so we make t-shirts that say in little or faithful in little, given much on the back. And the idea is really simple, I think, in any sport, that you're given the tools to succeed, but they're completely useless if you're not ready to take advantage of them. And especially at the Division III level. So Gordon is the only Division III school that competes in the lightweight IRA league for both men and women, which means that the odds are stacked against them all the time. And if they are of the approach that they need, X, Y, and Z in order to succeed, and if they don't have those things or they don't have those resources, they're not going to succeed, then we're never going to get anywhere. And so I think a lot of what makes our team unique is that we have a very strong underdog mentality. We always have. That's kind of been what we ride on, is like, we are the smallest school in our league. We have the least resources. We are, not an Ivy League, which is most of our competition. And yet, we're very determined to like honor and glorify God and do the absolute best we can with what we've been given. And the more consistently that has been our approach, the more resources we've gotten, the more we've had to work with. And I think that's a big piece of our culture. And it fosters a real family because everyone's rallied around this same vision of like, even though we shouldn't be fast, we're going to be anyway.
What does a typical rowing competition look like?
So there's two kinds. I'm going to talk about the spring. because I think that's what most people are thinking of. Rowing works a little bit like cross country and track and field, where, okay, yes, both are running, but it's sort of two very different sports in the fall and the spring. Rowing's the same way. We do like long distance pieces in the fall, very different. And then the spring is like our actual championship season. So in the spring, the way it works is like 2-3 weeks before the competition, I will have logged in and put in all of our entries of the different categories we're going to compete in. And that'll be specific to gender, specific to experience level. So there's like a novice category and there's varsity. And it'll be specific to boat class. So whether it's, 4 people in a boat together, 5 people in a boat together, 9 people in a boat together, whatever that is. So I'll put all those entries in. We'll be preparing, like getting ready, training in those specific boat classes. And then we travel, and we are not lucky enough to have a course on our like home body of water. So for us, the closest course is either Worcester or Boston, but the Boston course sucks. So try not to go down there as much as possible. And we'll load up the trailer usually we load up on Thursday night. Kids put all their boats on the trailer, oars, riggers. We have to bring tents because we're outside the whole time. We're staying somewhere. So usually we stay at like churches. So we'll have to bring sleeping bags and air mattresses. We have this giant tub that's just full of all the air mattresses and the pumps. We have to bring food, and like, it looks like we're going camping, but we're bringing our boats with us. We have a huge trailer. It's like 35 feet long and a big truck that tows everything. And then early Friday morning, all the kids will get into vans and they'll drive down, and I'll have left probably like 5 or 6 hours before them because it takes a long time to drive the trailer and we have to stop a lot because it drains the truck, the gas. So we'll head down to wherever it is that we're racing. Unfortunately, we're often racing in New Jersey, so it's often a really sucky long drive, but sometimes it's short, like Worcester. And then we'll get to the venue, wherever it is that we're racing. We'll put the riggers back on the boats, get them ready to go. The kids will go for a practice row. So they're allowed to use the course the day before to like make sure they know how the coxswains will practice going straight. They'll make sure they know how to get to the start and all that stuff, navigate the docks, which docks they're supposed to use. And then usually very, very early Saturday morning, everyone's at the course getting ready, and they'll launch about an hour before their race time. But on any given day, like, especially with our team, we'll have like somewhere between 4 and 12 individual crews launching over the course of the day. So like, if I have 30 kids, I might have 3 different doubles in the men's doubles race going, and that's 6 guys. But that's 3 different boats that are getting ready to go all at the same time. And so a lot of it is like a hubbub around the trailer as everyone's getting their boat ready, and I'm checking everything. We have to make sure they all have the right bound number so they're in the right lane. We bring their oars down, they'll launch. Usually it's like a heats on Saturday, finals on Sunday situation. So they'll go through their heats and hopefully they advance. And then Sunday they'll race again. Usually there's a final and a B final. So even if they didn't finish top 3 in their heat, they can still race again. They'll just be like racing for spots 7 to 12 or whatever. And then as soon as we've finished racing, we have to get the boats back on the trailer as fast as possible because we're going to fight rush hour traffic all the way back. And we have like practice and class on Monday morning. So it's a lot of traveling and a lot of like getting boats ready to go on the trailer, taking them off the trailer, putting them back on, all that stuff. For like 8 minutes of racing.
Who are some of the teams that you see during these competitions?
So our lightweight programs, unfortunately, lightweight rowing in the US is really struggling right now. And so we are trying really hard to be a big piece of turning that around as kind of a Division III school coming out of the gate saying we're going to commit to lightweight rowing. But unfortunately, the lightweight league is all Division I. So on the men's side, we're looking at Penn, Princeton, Dartmouth, Yale, Navy. Mercyhurst is a Division II that jumps in there. Fairfield is a big one. And then like Harvard and sometimes Berkeley will come out, which is really fun. The women, it's Stanford, Oklahoma City, Radcliffe, BU, Georgetown, Wisconsin, Princeton. And then our open weights are one of the only like sculling teams in the US. And so they're also kind of in a unique niche And they pretty much never have consistency across who they're racing, and who they're like trying to be competitive with, because we're kind of like at the top of that field. And so it's always like other people coming in and then they fall off again and we're like still there. And then that one's a lot less consistent. And there's no, the lightweights are in a league. The open weights don't have a conference. So they don't have like specific people they have to see in order to qualify for nationals. They qualify like automatically. And so that's a little bit, less consistent.
What is that like, obviously, getting to compete against those teams like Princeton, Yale, Harvard, and see those teams each week?
We lose a lot, full disclosure. But it's also really cool because it means that kids that come to this tiny little Christian school are competing like against the best of the best over and over and over again. And we're getting a lot closer. So that's exciting. We used to lose by like 4 minutes and now it's like seconds. So that's much more fun. And then whenever they get to race outside of their league, they're very fast, right? Like if we go to some, like this year, we're going to New York State Championships just for like fun. We got invited. Like that's not going to be anyone in our league. And they're going to be very competitive because they're used to racing these big wig, like very big deal schools. And so when they race schools that are more what would make sense for a Division III liberal arts school to race, you know, like if we race Skidmore or like Merrimack College or something like that, it's like the kids come off the water and like, wow, that was so like so easy. Like what happened? And it's fun to get kind of that when the bar is really, really high and you really want to meet it, it makes racing so much more fun.
What does that recruitment process look like for those prospective student athletes looking to go into rowing?
Yeah, this is a big one. Everybody wants to know this. Rowing is kind of a wild sport in that there's almost often on a given year, there's more money in scholarships for women's rowing than there are athletes to take it. Now, the reason that exists is because of Title IX. Women's rowing teams are one of the only sports that can have a roster the same size as a football team. And so a lot of large Division I football schools, like in the Midwest and in the South, will use their women's rowing team as the like funding that evens out the expenses they spend on the men's football team. So they often have to spend the same amount on their women's rowing team as they do on their men's football team, which results in a lot of open scholarship money. Like places like Kansas, Iowa. Iowa's a big rowing school, but you never think it because they're kind of in the middle of nowhere, but it's because they needed something to counteract their football team. And so they were able to build themselves a really big, powerful women's rowing team. Men's rowing is very different. It's not governed by the NCAA. So the regulations that go around men's rowing recruiting are very school specific. And if they're in the IRA, which is the Intercollegiate Rowing Association, which is what we are, then they follow like specific IRA rules. So we're the same as the other schools in our like league, but you don't necessarily have to be that way. And if you're not part of the IRA, you can do whatever you want. So men's rowing is a little different. A lot of what happens in men's rowing is not scholarship based. And it's like, we will help you get into this school, but like, we don't have a lot of money to give you because the Ivies generally don't give away scholarships, or they give away very few because they don't want student athletes to be at their school just because they're athletes. And then a lot of the large Division I men's teams are like they're not getting equal amounts of scholarships to their women's rowing teams because the women's rowing team is paired with the football team, and then the men's team gets paired with like women's golf or something in terms of funding. So it doesn't even out quite the same way. But a lot of it is now based on erg scores have a really big impact, which is hard for me. I don't think that's as big a deal or as important as we often make it out to be. So when I'm looking for recruits, I'm often going to the ones whose erg scores are not quite good enough, but who are really successful in races. And I'm like, hey, so you're not getting attention from these schools that you wanted to go to row lightweight, but you're pretty fast. I know this because you're beating people on the water. And at the end of the day, we race on the water. We don't race on the rowing machine. So I'm more than happy to talk to those kids and bring those to my program, which is nice because nobody else is doing it. So even so.
Of course, what does that official visit look like for those prospective student athletes when getting to see the rowing facility?
Yeah. So for us, our official visits are generally very like homey and fun. We try really hard to not make it like awkward or snooty. It's usually they're staying with athletes on campus, so somebody's going to be the host for that particular visit. We usually try to time our official visits with all pre-existing school visit days. So whether that's honors programming that's having a visit day or like an accepted students day, we'll try to time visits with that so that there's programming happening through the admissions office that will kind of pair nicely with what we're trying to do with our visits. And then our boathouse is about 15 minutes away from campus. So usually we do a boathouse tour that's just me and that student athlete and maybe their family if their family's around, because we'll have to drive over to the boathouse and see it. If they're doing a visit during the season, which is very rare, usually for us, all of our visits happen in the winter because the people we're recruiting are also racing and rowing. So they're also very busy in the fall and the spring. So if they happen to be coming when we're in season, they'll come to practice and ride in the launch with me. And then they'll see the boathouse that way, but usually it's like a separate visit. And so we'll go over, we'll see the boathouse. We'll talk about our water. Sometimes I take them out on the water so they can see it, because it's just pretty unique that we have a very protected body of water. So we don't have a lot of wind or waves or anything like that. Kids are often excited to not have to row in gross water. And then we'll usually also tour all the athletics facilities on campus, because as a varsity sport, we use like the varsity weight room, which Gordon just got a brand new one last week. Very exciting. And then we'll tour like our erg room and our indoor training facilities as well. And then usually there's like the captains take charge of fun things. So most people who come on an official visit to Gordon, like also have a Catan night or a movie night or a yoga night or something that's going on that same time that they get to be a part of, to kind of experience the family dynamic of the team, which I think is really crucial. And it's kind of the point of coming on a visit. Like, you can look at photos of the boathouse, you can look at photos of whatever, but until you go and actually interact with the coach and the team, you don't really know what you're getting yourself into and if it's a place where you'd fit in or not.
As an alma mater and a head coach, what is it like getting to see those freshmen put on that rowing uniform for the first time and your seniors putting it on for the last time?
So our program's only been around for 6 years. So I actually haven't really watched too many seniors leave. I think we've graduated like 7 total, like out of the program. We've had a lot of students who study abroad their last semester, and so it's a little different, or like, yeah, you don't quite have that same like climactic moment at the national championships where it's like, okay, and now it's done. And they're also really bad about actually stopping. So like, even if it's their last race, their senior year, then like that summer, I'll be like at a regatta and they'll be like, oh, coach, can I like jump into the club single and race? And then they like show up in their uni and they're ready to go. So we kind of have a slow burn end usually. It's very rare that a senior is like, okay, I'm done. So that's a little, I haven't had a moment like that yet, but I've been coaching my sister for the last 4 years and she is going to graduate this year. So I'm sure that will be a very emotional moment when she has her last race at nationals. But it's really exciting to watch the freshmen go, because like I said, like I never was a part of a team when I was at Gordon. Like there were a couple guys that rowed, but there were no other women. And so when I watched like our freshman women, like 8 of them all in their uni, like getting ready for photo day, it's like, wow, you guys have no idea how cool it is that you have this space and this like instant family. You showed up to school and all these people want to be your friend, and like these upperclassmen are taking care of you, and you've got people to get dinner with immediately as a freshman. And that part is really cool to me. I love seeing that.
What are some of your future plans as head coach for the rowing program moving forward?
Yeah, a lot of it rests on kind of how fast our program is growing and responding to that. Like, we're still at a point where, from a program direction sort of standpoint, we're very reactionary. So it's like, if I bring in a kid who's going to win nationals, great, let's do it. Let's go win nationals. But that's not necessarily the vision. It's more a matter of like looking at what we have and taking advantage of what's in front of us and kind of seizing the opportunities that we're given as we continue to kind of grow and develop. Because 6 years is not a long time, and 2 of those were COVID years. So it's kind of like we've only really been functioning for like 4 years. But I think some of the big pieces of it, like what we aspire to is being kind of the option for students who want to row at a Christian school in the United States. And we're very close to being the only option. There's probably only 8 Christian colleges in the United States with rowing programs. And of those, we are rapidly becoming the most competitive. And that's a big part of what we're trying to accomplish, even with, talking to the president of our school and like our athletic director. That's a big piece of what they're trying to do, is to create a space where we have things that set us apart as a school. And rowing is a really great one to set apart, because of all those schools that have rowing that are identified as Christian schools, we are one of the only ones with our own boathouse. We have a property, we have a boathouse. That's a big deal. And we have students who have won national championships, and we have students who, regularly compete against these huge big name schools and aren't like making a fool of themselves. They're not being embarrassed by their performance. And that is a really compelling thing. And so I think that's the big goal, is to drive it to a point where it's a household name in the rowing world, but also where any student who's wanting to row competitively in college and interested in pursuing like a Christian liberal arts education, we're top of the list for them.
What advice would you give those incoming freshmen entering their first year of college rowing?
I think this is not my quote. This is one I recently read in an interview and was very inspired by. Alex Karwoski said this, that it's not a sacrifice, it's a choice. And if you sit in the middle of winter in your erg room and you're like, man, look at all these sacrifices I am making for this team, you are going to fall apart so fast, because that's not where your head should be. Your head needs to acknowledge, like, you chose this because you wanted it. And if you want it, then you're going to be able to make it through. But if all you're doing is just being a victim of the situation you find yourself in, which it's easy to do, like rowing is a very hard sport, and especially scholarship athletes where you don't have a weight you can't quit because that's like what's paying for college. Like, seeing it as a sacrifice is so crippling, and seeing it as a proactive choice that you're in charge of and like the thing you wanted to do, even when it's hard, is so much more empowering and creates so much of a better environment for everybody else who's around you too.
What advice would you give those seniors that are looking to compete for the national team and then one day make it to the Olympics?
Mm-hmm. So this actually already is happening at our program. And I think happens a lot in rowing because we still have a trials system for certain boat classes. And so you don't have to get invited to a camp to get to be a part of the national team, which is kind of crazy. You can just go win the right race and then you get to be a part of it. And I think the biggest thing I would say is race as much as you can and as well as you can, because I coached abroad this summer. I coached in China, and the USA team we brought to China this summer was great kids, loved them. They were very immature when it came to racing, and they just did not know what to do with themselves when they lost. And they didn't know how to be like, okay, we didn't do great in the heat, we're going to have a better race in the final. It was like, if we didn't do well in the heat, we were going to do terribly in the final too. And no matter how much like I as a coach could say, no, that's not true, like, get your head on straight. If you don't have the experiences of like flipping things around and knowing that actually any bad race you have is your control and your agency, and also like how to not get freaked out when, the guy next to you has the Olympic rings tattooed on his bicep, like, so what, big deal? Like, he went to the Olympics, you could too, the intimidation factor can be so crippling at the starting line. And I think that's really what I would say is just like get as much experience racing as you possibly can, and find yourself a coach who actually believes you can do it. And like stick with them. People who hop between coaches, that training is so inconsistent and is becoming more and more of a trend in rowing, because I think more and more there's more options and you feel like, oh, well, this person will be better for me, or this person will be better. Like, what will be better is if you're with the same coach for the long period of time. So as you're leaving collegiate training, right, you've had consistency in your coaching, hopefully for the last 4 years, not a lot of turnover. You can achieve that same thing if you're consistent about where you train outside of college too. What
advice would you give those future college coaches out there that are looking to become head coaches for a rowing program?
Do it. That's the big one. It's not, it is not going to come down to how good you are at rowing ever. It's going to come down to what you can uniquely bring to the table that somebody else can't do. So for me, I have a background in the arts. When I look at a boat going by, I see it from an artist standpoint, not from a scientific standpoint or a sports standpoint. And so I can get kids who, like, on paper should not be fast to be much, much faster than they should be because I'm coaching the art. That's what I bring to the table. I also don't take no for an answer ever. So stubbornness is a huge deal in being a coach. And I think, especially for women looking to be a head coach in college, be as stubborn as you possibly can. Like, don't let anybody walk over you, because they're going to try to do that for the rest of your life. And you're not going to get anywhere if that can happen.
What advice would you give those coaches looking to coach at their alma mater and build their own program?
That one's, I think, uniquely challenging, because I would say, in my experience, I grew to love my school much more as someone who works there than as someone who went there as a student. And because I went there as a student, I knew that. And a lot of the people I work with did not go here and don't understand that the student experience is very different from the staff experience. And even if the staff are all great, which I know they are because I work with them, that the students may not be experiencing that in the same way that you are as someone who gets to interact with them. And that's just like a communication gap. And I'm grateful for being able to help close that. But I also think that difference is a really big deal. And you need to be really, really paying attention to the pulse of your team to understand what their student experience is like in the moment at any given time.
That's great advice. Where can my listeners find you at on social media along with the Gordon Rowing program at?
The Gordon Rowing, our Instagram is the best one to follow. There's two. There's Gordon Rowing, which I think is like Gordon College Rowing technically. But then there's also our Boathouse has a club program that's like juniors and masters and U23s and adaptive rowing. And that's the Gordon Rowing Center, is its own thing.
Thank you again, Coach Maddie Hopkins, for your interview, and best luck in your future as the head rowing coach at Gordon.
Thanks.
You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, Coach Maddie Hopkins, for your interview, and best luck in your future.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.